Good afternoon, and welcome to Podcasting 101 Part 1. My name is Trey Gwynn. Let me move my little video, my little webcam. I'm just going to make myself tiny in there. There we go. I'm the Technology and Outreach Coordinator for the Rutherford County Library System. I don't currently have an active podcast, but I have created, developed, produced, and co-hosted 3 podcasts, 2 personal and 1 professional. I'm also an avid podcast listener with over 144 days of content listened to. And I know that doesn't make me an expert in the same way that like watching a bunch of television doesn't make you an expert. I just think it's fun to keep track of that kind of thing. The purpose of this class is to help you develop, produce, and distribute a podcast over 3 one-hour sessions. If you have an idea for a podcast, this class is intended to help you turn it from an idea into reality. And if you don't have an idea, that's fine. We'll go through all the steps on how to go from having an idea to getting it onto the airwaves. As an aside, though, I can say that I can help you create your podcast, but the one thing that I cannot do is make your podcast popular. If I could do that, I would be a popular podcaster. If you figure it out, you can share the secret with me. Now, very few mediums have democratized content creation as much as podcasting. Whole multi-million-dollar corporations have gotten into the podcasting game, and yet it's still a field where a solitary person with a microphone can create something that people all over the world will listen to. As I said a moment ago, this class is a 3-part class. 3-part class. Hold on one second. There we go. Perfect. 3-part class. The first of the 3 classes, the one that we're doing today, will focus on development. Then part 2, which is coming up next month, will be production, and then in November we will do distribution. Now, when you saw Podcasting 101, your brain probably jumped straight to production, and we will talk about that next month. But what I've learned over the years, whenever I mess with podcasting, is that the more forethought that you put into your podcast, the more you will be able to execute your idea for what you want. How do we take that spark of an idea and blow oxygen onto it so that it becomes a raging fire, right, and becomes that podcast? And so what we're going to talk about today is all the thinking that you need to put into it before you ever put audio to tape. In my experience, the one podcast that I had the most control over was a podcast called Debate Club, and nobody's ever listened to it. It doesn't matter, but I had this idea for a podcast where people would actually like debate and have disagreements about nerdy pop culture things, right? And I asked some friends to get involved with it, and because I didn't have a strong vision of what it was going to be, it never was quite what I wanted it to be. To that end, I've created a worksheet for you to fill out to help you clarify what it is you're interested in pursuing. Once you've filled out the worksheet, you will have a rough sketch of the kind of podcast you want to do. Now, because this is a virtual class, you can find that worksheet in the description of this YouTube video. Hold on one second. I can even show it to you. Copy. Excuse me. I've got a bit of a cold. Let me pause that. So here, this link right here is the worksheet that I'm talking about. So as I refer to a worksheet, that's what I'm talking about. So if you want, go ahead and click on that. It will be available for you after the class if you'd rather do it then. But we're going to go through it step by step as part of this podcast, as part of this class. The first thing that you need to do, and in fact, I'm just gonna hold on. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna get rid of my little webcam. Boop. There we go. Now we've got the whole screen to play with. The first thing that you need to do is find a topic. Now there are podcasts about literally everything, so that means that any topic that you want to do is on the table, and that's great. That's wonderful. But it means that you're going to have competition no matter what you choose. If you can find that magic, subject where there's literally no podcasts, I would be, jump on it. But it is very unlikely to me at this point. There's podcasts about knitting. There's podcasts about sneakers. There's podcasts about men's jewelry. There's podcasts about every video game that's ever been made, even if it was only 35. Even if it was 35 years ago that it came out. So finding your topic is important, but you have to recognize that you will probably not be the only voice in that field. Now, to that end, the next step that you need to do is find your niche. What podcasts already exist that focus on your topic? What can you bring to the topic that other existing podcasts don't? Is your voice somehow unique in the subject matter that you want to do? This is going to require a little bit of research, but it's better than going in blind to a crowded market, right? So 2 of my 3 podcasts that I've made were some number of dudes sit around talking about nerdy topics, and the internet is rife with podcasts that are some number of dudes sit around talking about nerdy topics. We weren't bringing anything new to the conversation. We weren't bringing voices that were new to the conversation, and we weren't tackling it from a format that was different. So maybe if we had come up with some sort of different take on some number of dudes talking about nerdy stuff, it would have worked out just fine. But we didn't, and that's one of my biggest takeaways. Is you have to go in, you have to figure out what your niche is, what your hook is. Are you the normal demographic for something, or are you the abnormal demographic for something? Like could a bunch of bikers with big long beards do a podcast about knitting? That could be a really interesting hook, right? When there's already knitting podcasts, right? What about a podcast starring a bunch of octogenarians talking about their favorite video games? Again, I know I'm kind of exaggerating and making straw man jokes out of this, but I'm just saying that yeah, you may choose a topic that has people in it already, has podcasts in it already, but that doesn't mean that it's off limits to you. You just need to find how to make yourself stand out amongst what is an already crowded market, likely. Now, once you've figured out your topic and your niche, you need to figure out you need to spend some time thinking about your format. Now, there are podcasts that do things in every single way, right? If the recorded medium has been done in a way, there's a podcast that does it that way. That's a really awkward way to say it, but what I'm saying is that podcasters are trying everything that recorded medium has ever done, and I, in a very reductive way, have broken down all the podcasts that I know of into 6 categories. And they are panel discussions, some group of people sitting around talking about a topic, news, which is pretty straightforward, interview live, where it's like one-on-one, or one on multiple, or multiple on multiple, but interviewing, and it's just, here is the tape of, I sat down to interview someone. It's not very heavily edited. This is the interview from beginning to end. Interview edited, which is, normally, those are so similar that normally I wouldn't break them out, except for that those are some of the most, that interview, what I call interview edited, are some of the most popular podcasts out there. So like, think of like Serial. Like, these are interviews with multiple people, but they're chopped up and they're moved around, and they're used to create a narrative, instead of just like, here is an interview from beginning to end. And there's usually a narrative voice in the interview edited podcasts. And so, like I said, normally, like if we were talking about television, maybe I wouldn't split those 2 out and say they were different, except for that these are some of the most dominant podcasts on the internet. So like Serial, This American Life, Radiolab, the one that I have up there, 99% Invisible. These are podcasts that are on different subjects, but they are at their core interview shows. But then they use those interviews to create a narrative that is more intricate than just, I'm sitting down with someone and going from point A to point B in an interview. Then there are scripted podcasts, and then I just have everything else in an other category. Scripted podcasts, of course, are like your radio dramas, or similar, and there's a whole bunch of those. Maybe the most popular is the one that I have there on the screen, Welcome to Night Vale, which is kind of a, I don't know, like Twin Peaks meets, I don't even know, Twin Peaks meets X-Files, but even weirder than that. I know. Twin Peaks meets like the humor of like Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams. It's really interesting, super weird. And then the other category is just literally everything. Like the one that I have, the Adventure Zone, which is what I have on the screen right now, is a podcast where it's what's called an actual play podcast, where someone sits down and plays, where a group of people sit down and play like a role playing game, and they record it, and then that's what the podcast is. So you need to, again, before you ever sit down in front of a microphone, you need to give some thought to what your format is going to be. Is it, you need to have some idea, and I would even suggest, not that you want to copy other podcasts, but what you need to do is you need to listen to podcasts and say, okay, the Joe Rogan podcast, You Made It Weird with Pete, and WTF with Mark Maron. If you're a big fan of those, that style, then you need, then you can go with that. It's just something that you need to have sorted before you ever sit down and record, because along with other things, it will, depending on which one you choose, you're going to rely on other people, whether that's the interviewee and the interviewee changes every time, or like if you're going to do a panel podcast, you need other people to be on the panel. And so it takes some planning to do that kind of thing. So once you've done that, and again, I'm going to try to say this multiple times through this, but you can find a Google Docs link to the worksheet that I'm kind of walking you through in the description of this video. You can click on it and download it. And so we're kind of just going through each of those sections so that by the time if you were to fill out the worksheet, you would have the plan in place for a podcast. And so, part 4, once you've figured out once you figured out your topic, your niche, your format, you need to figure out your tone. Are you going to be very serious? Are you going to be serial? Are you investigating something and it's a serious crime that you need to look into? Are you going to be humorous? Are you and some other people going to sit around making jokes about the news or making jokes about your favorite movies or something? Or are you going to be flexible? Like, one of my favorite podcasts is a podcast called Criminal. Criminal is a podcast where the two hosts every week bring, or every fortnight, they have a topic of an interesting true crime story. So it's not always just blood and guts. It's usually like some weird twist. Like the one that came out 2 weeks ago was about kids solving crimes, like real life kids solving crimes. But sometimes they do very serious episodes, and so it can be like sweet and lighthearted, or it can be serious. You just need to know. You need to know what tone you're setting before you get started. And you need to know whether, even if that tone is meant to be flexible, you need to find that middle ground to start with, so that you can, it's like a wave, right? You need to be, if you're gonna be flexible, then you need to start out at a tone where you can dip down into the serious, or you can rise up to the humorous. You need to kind of start with that middle even keel, because if you start in your first episode and you're like, morning zoo crew type of stuff, and then in the next episode you're like, no, we're gonna get serious. Like unless, I don't know, maybe somebody could pull that off, but I think it would be really hard for most people. So once you find your tone, you need to find your voice, which I know probably sounds similar, and maybe I'm even using the wrong term here, but what kind of podcast are you, or not what kind of podcast, do you want it to, who do you want to be involved? Is it just you? Are you going to sit there solo talking to the microphone about something? And there are podcasts like that. You'd think that those would be boring, but they're not. There's several podcasts out there that from 15 minutes to more than 2 hours are just one person talking to the microphone. And if you have enough charisma, you can pull that off. I do not, and that's why you're probably bored of this already after 17 minutes, but hopefully you're sticking it out with me. Excuse me, there's my cold again. Do you want it to be solo? Do you want it to be you and one other person, be like you and an interviewee? Do you want it to be you telling a story? Do you want it to be solo? Do you want it to be a duet? Is it you and another person having a conversation, or interviewing someone? And then of course it can be way more than that. I personally think that 4 voices, 5 voices is probably the most that you can have without it starting to get a little bit chaotic. The more people you add, the more you really have to be careful not to talk over each other, especially if you're not famous going into the podcast. You need to learn how to find ways to distinguish between you and your co-hosts if you have multiple voices going on. But it's totally possible. It's totally plausible to have more than 2 people. There are a lot of podcasts like that. Then you need to find your length. There are podcasts from every length. There are super short podcasts that come out, that come out in under 20 minutes. There are podcasts that are like 30 to 2 hours, and then there are podcasts that are way longer. On this, I have kind of a joke saying that anything over 2 hours is Dan Carlin. Dan Carlin is the podcast host of Hardcore History. He's one of those guys that literally just talks into a microphone, just him, for like 2 to 3 hours, and it's riveting, or it can be riveting. But you need to understand your length. You also need to understand that like the length that you set in your head, it's kind of like a deadline, right? Like you don't want a bunch of fluff at the end just because you said it was going to be a 2-hour podcast. You only had an hour's worth of content. You need to be vicious when you're thinking through the outline of what you're going to talk about, whether that's scripted or whether it's ad-libbed, whether it's off the cuff as you and another person are talking, whether it's you in the editing room. If you, the person that is involved, is bored, then it is likely that any listeners are going to be bored. So the higher the energy you have, the more engaged listeners are going to be. So if you're high energy, if you can sustain high energy and charisma for 15 to 30 minutes, then that's what your podcast needs to be. If you can do longer than that, great. But I am of the belief, I listened to a couple of pretty long podcasts, but I'm of the belief that an hour is close to the most that you should do. But there are a lot of people out there that listen to much longer podcasts than that. I just think that an hour is kind of the perfect cutting off point, personally. And it may take some trial and error to figure out what you can sustain and what your listeners will listen to. We'll talk about finding your flexibility here in a little while, in a few slides. Once you've figured all that stuff out, and in fact, I'm just going to real quick do a recap. Find your topic. Find your niche within the competition for that topic. Find your format. Excuse me. Find your tone. Find your voice. Find your length. And then find your schedule. Now, there are podcast schedules for every time interval. There are daily podcasts all the way up to yearly podcasts and everything in between, including intermittent podcasting, where like a podcast will just come out whenever the podcasters want to do one. Now, my advice to you is that if you're starting a podcast and you are not already famous, and you may be, I don't know who's in this class, but if you're not already famous, you need to find a regular schedule, even if it's excuse me, you need to find a regular schedule, even if it's a lot of time in between podcasts, so that as you're recording, you can say, okay, join us, towards the end, you can say, join us next month, join us in 2 weeks, whatever the interval is, so that they know when you're coming back, so that you can gain a consistent audience. I think the shorter the interval, the better, personally, but I know that not everybody's schedule works that way. I think weekly is kind of the perfect interval, but not everybody's schedule can work like that. But regardless of what your interval is, you need to be clear about it with your audience, so that they will be on the lookout for your next episode, and so that after a few times they can be like, okay, well, I am looking forward to this podcast that comes out every fortnight, right? And I'm looking forward to this coming Friday because there wasn't a podcast last Friday. Like think about your favorite TV shows, right? Your favorite TV shows during the season when they air, they come out at the same time, the same day, every week, and you need to kind of think that same way. Think about your favorite TV show that got canceled. It is, some of the most famous like canceled TV shows like Firefly, or like I feel like Cartoon Network does this to their shows a lot, where they mess with their schedules, they air things out of order, and people don't know when to see them, and it's just because they don't actually care, whether it's because the network doesn't actually care whether they are popular, because they're gonna cancel them anyways. That's kind of aside, but what I'm saying is the consistency will help you build an audience. Once you've decided on all of that, you need to think about your name. Do you want your name to be funny? Do you want it to be clever? Do you want it to be practical? Is it something where you want to be like, okay, we are, we're going to talk about database management in this podcast, so we're the database management podcast? Or do you want it to be something, punny, Punny, or do you want it to be something, that lets people know what the tone of the podcast is going to be? You have to, it kind of goes back to that question of tone, right, that we talked about earlier. If you're going to be funny, if you're going to be clever, if you're going to be serious, the name kind of needs to reflect that. I personally am not a fan of the dry podcast names, right? So like, even if you're going to be serious, I don't think I personally wouldn't want to listen to like, I'm not a big true crime podcast fan, but if you were going to do a true crime podcast and it was going to be super serious, I would much rather like a clever name personally than like something super dry that was just like I don't know, like in Trey investigates something, although actually that's not a terrible, I don't know. I'm just saying that I prefer the clever ones personally. If I'm looking for a new podcast to listen to, okay, here's a perfect example. Sorry. So I'm a big fan of some history podcasts, right? But the name that I hate or that I personally dislike the most, and this is no shade on the actual podcast because it's good, or the podcast network because this is the network. It's kind of the network shtick. But like Stuff You Missed in History Class is just so dry to me. Like, that name is just so dry to me. But I recognize that that's part of the network that they're on shtick, is that it's all stuff, right? Stuff you need to know, stuff, and I'm saying things I probably shouldn't say. Anyways, I just prefer clever over dry personally. Once you've come up with a name though, you need to check around first. You Google it, check out Apple Podcasts, check other podcasters, see if you can, if you find someone with that name. When I was at the Hermitage, we did a podcast called that eventually became POTUS 7 podcast, but our original thought for the name was the Kitchen Cabinet, because Andrew Jackson was kind of the first president to have that kitchen cabinet within his cabinet, that was like his closest advisors. But there was already a BBC radio podcast that was called The Kitchen Cabinet, and so we couldn't go with it. And we had gotten pretty deep into like creating imagery, creating merchandise for the Kitchen Cabinet podcast before we found out that like that wasn't available to us. So as you think of names, you need to Google them immediately, and don't become enamored with them until you've made sure that no one else is using them. The final piece of today's podcasting class is, if you're enjoying yourself, but it isn't working, and what I mean by that is like you're not getting the listens that you would like, or like you listen to it as you're editing it and it feels like you're not, it just isn't working. like it's not coming together the way you would like, feel secure in your ability to shake things up. Just because you've become enamored with a certain way of doing things doesn't mean that like going back to the drawing board would hurt. Take suggestions. Ask other people to listen to it and take their criticism and take it seriously. I know it's something that if you've poured your heart into, it can be hard to take criticism. But believe me, if someone in your life is willing to listen to your podcast and give you constructive criticism about it, you should take it, because that is someone that cares about you, because most people do not listen to the podcasts of people that are in their lives. So be willing to take their criticism. But that is everything that we were going to talk about today. Remember that next month, in fact, I can tell you the exact date. Next month on October 30th, we will be doing part 2, which is about production. I'll show you some of the things that the library can help you do, like our recording studio and stuff like that, and some free programs that you can use. And then a month from then, sometime in November, I'm not exactly sure of the date, we will do distribution. We will talk about how to get your podcasts on Apple Podcasts and other stuff like that. So I hope you have a good day. I hope you're all staying healthy and well, and I'll see you next time.